or need for discussion? Is there a motion to approve the board meeting minutes of September?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, I move that the minutes be approved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is board member
This meeting
Stasko. I
is being
second the motion.
recorded.
Thank you. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes. Agenda item 2. Office of General Counsel's Departmental Report. General Counsel David Wertheim will present the statistical and informational report for September.
Thank you, and good morning, Vice Chair, and good morning to board members and guests. Here is a statistical report for the month of September in terms of how issues are resolved at the board. First, in the adjudication division, there were 15,437 hearings held, 10,454 cases fully resolved at the hearing, with 451 reserved decisions being issued. There were 2,065 finalized waiver agreements in September, 1,958 through the hearing process, and 107 through mutual consent for desk processing. In the Administrative Review Division, there were 899 applications for administrative review received, 933 applications processed during the month, lowering the inventory to 2,416, with 95% of all resolutions being issued within 6 months of the application. In terms of applications for full board review, the board received 135 during September and processed 128, leaving a case inventory of 179 at the close of September. That concludes the statistical report. Of course, I will take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or need for discussion? Hearing none, may I have a motion to accept the Office of General Counsel's report?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. Board Member Higgins, I move that the report be accepted.
Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is board member Stasko, and I second the motion.
Thank you. Is there any opposition to this motion? Hearing and seeing none, that motion passes. Item agenda 3. Elizabeth Lott will now present all the licensing applications for the month. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair.
Good morning.
And guests. You have before you the recommendations from the assigned board panel regarding the licensing applications listed in Part 3 of today's agenda. Section 24A, Lewis A. Hawkins, 3-year renewal. Deborah A. Drake, 3-year renewal. Section 53-B, Monroe 2 Orleans Bose's, 3-year renewal. St. Lawrence Lewis Bose's, 3-year renewal. Section 53D, Zurich American Life Insurance Company of New York, 3-year renewal. Markel Service, Inc., 1-year renewal. Emerald Claims Management of New York, LLC, 3-year renewal. I present these recommendations to the board for your consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there any need for discussion or any questions? Okay, may I have a motion to accept the recommendations of the panels as presented and as identified as item 3 on the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair. I move that the recommendations be accepted by the full board. Board Member Higgins.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is board member Stasko. I second that motion.
Thank you. Is there any opposition to this motion? Seeing and hearing none, the motion passes. Moving on to agenda item 4, legal appeals. General Counsel Wertheim will now present the recommendations concerning decisions by the Appellate Division.
Thank you again, Madam Vice Chair. From the time of the September board meeting until today, the Appellate Division 3rd Department issued 12 decisions with respect to workers' compensation claims. They're set forth at item 4 of your agenda. Of those 12, 8 were affirmances, 1 was a modification, and 3 were reversals of the board panel decisions. It's the recommendation of General Counsel that all 12 of the decisions of the court be adopted as the decisions of the board.
Thank you very much. May I have a motion to accept the recommendations of General Counsel?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. Board Member Higgins, I move to accept the recommendations of council.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is Board Member Stasko. I second that motion.
Thank you. Is there any opposition to this motion? Hearing and seeing none, that motion passes. Agenda item 5, mandatory full board review. The first case on the agenda is Gento Constructions, Inc., case number G2043408. Is there a motion in respect to 5A on the agenda?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is Board Member Stephen Crane. I move that the majority opinion be adopted as the opinion of the full board.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, this is Board Member Canginelli, and I second that motion.
Thank you. Does anyone need to be recused from this case? No recusals. Is there any opposition to the motion? For the record, I call upon the secretary for a roll call vote.
Board Member Osili.
Yes.
Board Member Canginelli.
Yes.
Board Member Crane.
Yes.
Board Member Delon.
Yes.
Board Member Higgins.
Yes.
Board Member Hull.
Yes.
Board Member Loban.
Yes.
Board Member Peprocki.
Yes.
Board Member Stasko.
Yes.
Board Member Taveras.
Yes.
Board Member Williams.
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster.
Yes.
That motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. Item agenda 5B, Town of Ulster, case number G0211177. Is there a motion in respect to 5B on the agenda?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, I move that the board panel decision be adopted as the opinion of the full board.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is Board Member Canginelli, and I second that motion.
Are there any recusals on this item? Hearing none, is there any opposition on this motion? For the record, I call upon the secretary for a roll call vote.
Board Member Osili.
Yes.
Board Member Canginelli.
Yes.
Board Member Crane.
Yes.
Board Member Delon.
Yes.
Board Member Higgins.
Yes.
Board Member Hull.
Yes.
Board Member Loban. Board Member Peprocki.
Yes.
Board Member Stasko.
Yes.
Board Member Taveras.
Yes.
Board Member Williams.
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster.
Yes.
That motion is carried unanimous.
Thank you. The next item is County of Albany, case number G2458778. Is there a motion in respect to 5C on the agenda? Their motion for item 5C.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is Lauren Loban. And I would recommend that the majority opinion be adopted as the opinion of the full board.
Thank you. May I have a second?
This is Board Member Delon, and I second that motion.
Thank you. Does anyone need to be recused from this case? Is there any opposition?
This is Board Member Hull. There is opposition.
Thank you. I call upon the secretary for roll call vote.
Osili,
No.
Board Member Cajanelli,
No.
Board Member Crane,
Yes.
Board Member Delon,
Yes.
Board Member Higgins,
Yes.
Board Member Hull,
No.
Board Member Loban,
Yes.
Board Member Peprocki,
Yes.
Board Member Stasko,
Yes.
Board Member Taveras,
Yes.
Board Member Williams,
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster.
Yes.
That motion is carried 9-3.
Thank you. Next case on the agenda, 5D, Almer Plumbing and Heating Corporation. Case number G1785779. Is there a motion in respect to 5D on the agenda?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is Board Member Frederick Orsley. I move that the majority opinion be adopted as the opinion of the full board.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is Board Member Peprocki. I second that motion.
Thank you. Does anyone need to be recused from this case? Is there any opposition to the motion? For the record, I call upon the secretary for a roll call vote.
Board Member Osili,
Yes.
Board Member Cajanelli,
Yes.
Board Member Crane,
Yes.
Board Member Delon,
Yes.
Board Member Higgins,
Yes.
Board Member Hull,
Yes.
Board Member Loban,
Yes.
Board Member Peprocki,
Yes.
Board Member Stasko,
Yes.
Board Member Taveras,
Yes.
Board Member Williams,
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster.
Yes.
That motion is passed unanimously.
Thank you. Item 5E, Rochester Genesee Regional, case number G1305416. Is there a motion in respect to this item?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Board Member Williams. I would move that neither the majority or dissent be adopted and that the new decision be issued.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Lauren Loban, and I second the motion.
Thank you. Does anyone need to be recused from this case? Is there any opposition?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, there is opposition.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, may we have a roll call vote?
Board Member Osili,
Yes.
Board Member Cajanelli,
No.
Board Member Crane,
Yes.
Board Member Delon,
Yes.
Board Member Higgins,
Yes.
Board Member Hall,
No.
Board Member Loban,
Yes.
Board Member Peprocki,
Yes.
Board Member Stasko,
Yes.
Board Member Taveras,
Yes.
Board Member Williams,
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster.
Yes.
That motion is passed 10-2.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, discretionary full board review. For the cases listed in item 6 on your agenda, it's been recommended that full board review be granted. Those cases are 6A, matter of the Stella Orton Home Care Age, 6B, matter of Precision Transport, and 6C, matter of New York Blood Center Incorporated. I move to refer the cases back to the respective panels for further consideration. Is there a second?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair, this is Board Member Stasko. I second the motion.
Thank you very much. Does anyone need to be recused from any of these cases? Is there any opposition to the motion? For the record, we will do a roll call vote.
Board Member,
Yes.
Board Member Cajanelli,
Yes.
Board Member Crane,
Yes.
Board Member Delon. Board Member Delon.
Yes.
Board Member Higgins,
Yes.
Board Member Hall,
Yes.
Board Member Lobin, I'm sorry, Board Member Lobin? He said yes. Board Member Peprocki,
Yes.
Board Member Stasko,
Yes.
Board Member Taveras,
Yes.
Board Member Williams,
Yes.
Vice Chair Foster.
Yes.
That motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, Madam Vice Chair,
Yes.
it's David Wertheim. May I recommend that we take a 5-minute break after item number 7 to work on a technological issue?
Absolutely. We are at a break for about, what do you say, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes?
I think, yeah, we just need to fix a technological issue. So hopefully
Okay.
it'll just take a couple of minutes, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, everyone, we are at ease.
Okay.
Your presenter, I'm passing it over.
And yes, and I can get to what I need to do. I think we are good. Give me one
Okay.
second.
Here we go. While you're getting that together, I'm going to move forward with the introduction. I'm happy to welcome our guest speaker to this month's board meeting. Robert Adair is New York State's Chief Deputy Inspector General.
Recorded.
As Chief Deputy, her purview covers all Inspector General operations and investigations statewide. Ms. Adair brings her broad experience as an attorney to this important position. Before joining the Inspector General's office, Ms. Adair served in the New York State Executive Chamber as Assistant Counsel, covering technology, local governments, and gubernatorial appointments.
Hey, Franco.
She has also served as the Special Counsel for Ethics, Risk and Compliance at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and at the Office of State Parks of Historic Preservation. Ms. Adair has also held a number of other roles in New York State government. She has served as a prosecutor in the Rensselaer County District Attorney's Office and has been awarded several prestigious awards for her work. Please join me in welcoming Robin Adair, as well as her colleagues, Michelle Host, Chief Counsel, and Brian Richmond, Senior Investigative Counsel for Workers' Compensation.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you.
Secretary McCarroll, Executive Director Wood, of course, Chair Rodriguez, who is absent today, esteemed members of the board. On behalf of the Inspector General, Letizia Tagliafiero, it's my honor and privilege to present to the board today, along with my esteemed colleagues. Next slide.
I'm trying. Sorry, I'm not exactly sure why it's not going.
Okay.
I think am I still the presenter? There we go.
Perfect.
My apologies.
And the purpose of today's presentation is an overview to the board of the Workers' Comp Fraud Inspector General's 2019 annual report. The offices of the State Inspector General are comprised of welfare fraud, workers' compensation fraud, and regular general state inspector general fraud, where we investigate fraud, waste, and abuse of state employees. We're comprised of investigators, auditors, investigative counsels, forensic accountants, IT specialists, and various investigative aides. Our main headquarters are in Albany. We have large offices in New York City and in Buffalo, and several satellite offices in Syracuse, Hauppauge, and Suffern. And Suffern, the main focus of that office is we are fraud monitors on the Mario M. Cuomo New York Bridge.
As the members of the board know well, the New York State Office of the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General has broad authority to investigate any violations of the laws and regulations pertaining to the workers' compensation system. The Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General's jurisdiction is spelled out in Section 136 of the Workers' Compensation Law. Now, when we say that the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General's jurisdiction is broad, what does that mean? Well, it means that in addition to all of the things that we see on this slide in terms of conducting and supervising investigations, being able to investigate traditional insurance fraud matters focused on providers, claimants, and various sorts of professionals, we can truly look at almost everything involved in the workers' compensation system. For example, one recent case that is not in our 2019 annual report, but really illustrates the breadth of our jurisdiction, involved a court stenographer who allegedly routinely inflated billing invoices to insurance carrier clients over the course of several years in the amount of more than $180,000. Our investigation found that the stenographer regularly submitted bills to the carriers for services approximately 10 times the appropriate value by simply adding a zero at the end of her invoices. The inflated costs were then passed on to workers' compensation insurance carriers, which in turn may have negatively impacted premiums. The stenographer pleaded guilty to felony charges in October and will be sentenced in December. Now, where do our cases come from? They come to us from a wide variety of sources. For example, the stenographer example I just described was referred to us by several carriers. In addition to the carriers, we receive cases from New York state agencies that we work with collaboratively, state employees, members of the public, law enforcement, proactive initiatives, from municipalities, from the board itself, from many of you, and our workers' compensation fraud triage team carefully reviews every 114A decision issued by the board to see if there's a component that we can be investigating to find workers' compensation fraud. If someone wants to refer a case to us, how does it work logistically? We have a well-trained in-house case management team that receives and reviews our cases over the phone, via email, and once in a while in person. Our complaints are handled by this team and then passed on to the Inspector General herself, her executive staff, and senior management. Complaints that require further investigation are then assessed by the triage team that I mentioned earlier. So every complaint we receive receives a huge amount of attention all the way through the process. To increase our referrals and bolster our partnerships, the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General participates in a wide variety of training events, both as presenters and as participants. As you can see from this slide, many of the events we presented at in 2019 were courtesy of the board. And before last fall, many of them featured not only our co-presenter, Brian Richmond, but the former Deputy Inspector General for Workers' Compensation Fraud, and currently the Project Director, Regulatory Affairs at the board, the wonderful Audrey Maiello Cunningham. In addition to the presentations that we make to the board and to insurers groups and the IMEs, our attorneys and investigators also make a real effort to be active members of the insurance community by attending events hosted by the National Insurance Crime Bureau and the New York State Association of Self-Insured Counties. By both attending and participating in events, we increase our referrals and build helpful partnerships throughout New York State.
So here is a summary of the 2019, that calendar year in review. And most notably, IG Tagliaferro was appointed to serve as the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General in September 2019. So from that particular quarter onward, we've certainly had not only an office transition, but a reexamination and an evaluation of how to move forward efficiently. So for 2019, we had 1,441 complaints, 25 arrests, 16 of which involved claimant fraud, 8 employer fraud, and one particular arrest, one matter was a hybrid complaint employer fraud. And that totaled $1,325,000 in fraud, which is a significant increase from 2018, where there was only about 9. So this is a new metric we started tracking in 2019, and this is the amount of restitution. So successful prosecutions during that calendar year resulted in $1,373,000 in restitution awards, and that money went back to New York State agencies and authorities, SIF, carriers, and self-insured employees.
In addition to the metrics that Robin noted, in 2019, the Inspector General also continued a number of initiatives through which we made recommendations that resulted in some notable changes. Since its inception, the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General has participated in a pilot program with the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, DOCS. Through this pilot program, WCFIG has received numerous referrals over the years that have resulted in arrests, successful prosecutions, and ultimately in restitution orders for the state. In 2019, the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General recommended that changes be made to the directives and forms used by DOCS for employees claiming workers' compensation benefits through NYSCOBA's contract with the state. These changes, which were agreed to and implemented by DOCS in 2019, clarified the representations being made by claimants in their claims, and also the evidentiary value of submitted documents when fraud is found. It increased their value through our investigations and when fraud is referred for prosecution. In 2019, there was also a new C3 employee claim form that was adopted by the board, which implemented a very small but a meaningful change recommended by the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General. The previous version of the C3 form utilized the inquiry, "Do you remember having an injury to the same body part or similar illness?" The new C3 form, adopted by the board in 2019, now uses the inquiry, "Have you had an injury to the same body part or similar illness?" This change, though small, produces some additional clarity regarding the claim, and once again increases the evidentiary value of the form in our investigations and in referrals for prosecutions where fraud is indicated. Did want to go through a couple of sample cases from 2019. The first is an uninsured contractor case. As noted by Michelle, in 2019, the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General engaged in considerable outreach. Part of that outreach included speaking to municipal code enforcement officers and building inspectors at their organization's conferences. As a result of this outreach, the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General in 2019 and in 2020 has received a number of fraud referrals involving contractors' failure to provide workers' comp insurance, improper usage of the CE 200 exemption certificates, and submission of false insurance certificates when, for example, applying for building permits. In this case, this was a Capital Region contractor who submitted false workers' compensation insurance certificate to the city building department when applying for a work permit. Ultimately, there was more than $15,000 that was paid by a homeowner when these contractors left the job unfinished. This case was actually referred to us by a Capital Region local county district attorney's office who came to us and after having worked with us previously with some successful prosecutions. And they had a complaint from a homeowner that a contractor came, took her money and walked off the job after only a couple of days of work. They had filed a larceny complaint, but he came to us to strengthen his case since there was a possibility that was more of a civil matter. The allegation that we had was that there were employees on the job, but the insurance certificate that was submitted may have been false or fraudulent. Go to the next. Thank you. So we did find through our investigation that despite having multiple employees, the contractor did not have current workers' compensation insurance. The submitted policy or certificate of insurance had been canceled actually 2 years before that certificate was submitted to the municipality. The contractor, we found, had altered the dates on the previously improperly issued certificate when applying for a permit. We have a little bit of the actual evidence in the case, redacted evidence in the case here. This is the insurance certificate that was submitted. We've redacted everything, but I don't know if you can see in the date, it has an effective date through 2017. In the following slide, we went to the carrier and obtained the policy and also the cancellation documents, which indicated that the policy had actually been effectively terminated, effective all the way back in 2014. So the result in this case, the district attorney added charges from our workers' compensation fraud investigation, including a falsifying business records complaint and a criminal possession of a forged instrument felony complaint. The disposition ultimately was that the defendant had pled guilty to falsifying business records, was sentenced to a year probation, and most significantly for the homeowner, paid back $15,000 in restitution. The other case we wanted to go through was a case that we call fires, fares, and fraud. This is the hybrid employer claimant case that Raman noted in our metrics earlier. This is also a good example of a case that started with a simple allegation of performing volunteer activities beyond the claimant's capabilities as represented to providers. And through through the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General's investigation, was discovered to be a much more substantial case of fraud. The overview: this was a state employee who collected over $100,000 in workers' compensation wage indemnity benefits and Medicaid transportation provider payments while engaging in a multitude of other activities, including volunteering extensively as a firefighter, working 3 jobs while collecting indemnity benefits, and in fact operating his own taxi business, a Medicaid transportation business, with employees and without insurance. So this was a state psychiatric center employee who was working as a safety and security officer, who began collecting some workers' compensation wage indemnity benefits. The allegation as it originally came in from an anonymous source was that this claimant was volunteering as a firefighter while in Israel. There was some newspaper clippings showing that he was engaged in the civic deed of volunteering as a firefighter in Israel. So when we get this allegation, we looked initially at the representations. we often begin in this type of a case, whether it's this type of a case or a working while collecting case, with the representations that are made to the board, to treating physicians, to the IME providers, because it's those representations that are intended, that are made with the intent to obtain benefits. And those representations are ultimately relied on. So we looked at those representations, the IME provider statements, and any written questionnaires. When we looked at the volunteer activity from the original complaint, we found that he was an active volunteer with the fire department. We found some very detailed fire department call records, which indicated that there were 44 emergency calls that this particular claimant responded to during the period of time that he was collecting wage indemnity benefits. On the next slide, we have actually the call log, which is a particular call log for that claimant. However, that alone may not have been sufficient to make out a case of fraud, because there was not an ability to determine exactly what activities he was doing when he was responding to those calls or volunteering while in Israel. So it's, when we call it those types of cases degree of disability cases where there's not a work element, and those cases really rely on the representations versus what activities we can show that they were doing. What we did find while looking at those volunteer fire department records, though, was that he actually was engaged in numerous business activities while he was collecting. The first was some work activity as a city code enforcement officer. This was on the books work that he was engaged in. We looked and found payroll records, weekly timesheets. We had very detailed inspection reports and violations that were actually authored by the claimant. We knew exactly what he was looking at, what he was doing, and when he was doing it. And most significantly, it was during the period of time that he was out of work collecting wage indemnity benefits. We also obtained a resume and a job application that he made. It was a very recent resume and job application, which listed many other business activities, which assisted us in this investigation. So this is a weekly time card at that first position as code enforcement officer, indicating when he was working, the hours that he was working. Next slide, we also have a violation that was authored by the claimant. And again, this was detailing what he was inspecting, and it was during a period of time that he was out collecting wage indemnity benefits. The second job that he had was work, this time again on the books, as a county hazmat instructor. Again, we looked at employment payroll records, training sheets, time cards, all these things to evidence his work activity while he was out collecting benefits. We engaged in numerous interviews of the treating physicians and the IME providers. This is really to get at the representations that were being made, not just that were submitted in writing in the physician's reports and the IME reports, but also any oral representations that were made by the claimant in regard to his work activity or his abilities. Also, of course, we spoke to the fire department officers and county and civil employees concerning his outside work employment. The last job that he had was owning and operating a taxi business. And this was a particular type of taxi business. This is a Medicaid provider business. As some of you may recall, in 2018, there's a little bit of feedback, I'm sorry. In 2018, I'm almost doing this to music now. In 2018, there were a number of arrests and successful prosecutions that continued into 2019 in regard to a Medicaid taxi transportation business and an initiative launched by the Workers' Compensation Inspector General, Fraud Inspector General in 2018. This was under the theory, essentially, that the Medicaid transportation providers make certifications to the Department of Health in regard to their compliance with local and state laws. These laws include the workers' compensation law. So where those providers did not have workers' compensation insurance for their employees, it was improper for them to bill the Department of Health for their Medicaid transportation trips. What we found is, in this case, similar to those other cases, although on a smaller degree, this person was owned and operated a similar taxi business, had more than 20 drivers, billed Medicaid to transport these patients while he was out of compliance with the workers' compensation requirements. And we also found, interestingly enough, that this claimant had actually listed himself as the driver on a trip on the same afternoon that he injured himself in the morning with his employment with the state. Next slide. So we filed a number of charges, grand larceny, multiple counts of each of these: grand larceny, insurance fraud, falsifying business records, and the workers' compensation crimes of failure to secure compensation, workers' compensation law section 52, and fraudulent practices under workers' compensation law section 114, both felonies. This case is currently pending with the Rockland County District Attorney's Office, and we would remind everyone in regard to this case that the defendant is innocent until proven guilty.
Thank you, Brian. So just to talk about where our office is right now and looking ahead in the wake of COVID-19, over the course of the past 8 to 9 months, the Workers' Compensation Fraud IG quickly had to be flexible and re-envision how we were going to conduct business. So we pivoted to remote access, telecommuting and remote working, and that remote access involved database and systems access, and in lieu of conducting personal in-person interviews, we moved to virtual interviews, particularly on the WebEx platform, of witnesses and of our targets of defendants. And in doing so, we've been able to almost seamlessly continue our investigations, work with our prosecutors, build those relationships, and effectively prosecute workers' compensation fraud. Particularly with respect to COVID-19 workers' compensation fraud, understanding that this issue is very timely and relevant, our office has not received any complaint referrals yet, but this is a good opportunity for us to work with the board to establish a process and a framework for not only looking at the data, looking at COVID workers' comp claim data, but setting up a framework for doing so. Because of course, as you're well aware, the potential for fraud certainly exists and it increases, particularly as people are not only being diagnosed with COVID-19, but their family members, and as we learn more about prolonged exposure. So this last slide, it just reiterates our contact information for the offices of the Inspector General. As Michelle mentioned earlier when she was talking about complaint referral and processing, this is information for our case management unit and our complaint hotline, and of course our email addresses. And on behalf of the Inspector General, Letizia Tagliafiero, very honored and privileged to have the opportunity to present before the board today. Are there any questions from any board members for us to talk through today before we break?
Thank you for your presentation. It was really, really enlightening, and I'm sure that COVID has kept you hopping as much as it has everyone else. So at this time, if there are any questions from the board members, please proceed. And since it was so much, and we have a lot of different balls rolling, simultaneously. If board members should come up with some questions, afterwards, you walk away and you're like, oh, I should have asked that. We will definitely forward those to your office for further clarification, as I'm sure we will be. This is a living situation that we are experiencing, and it will change more and more every day, I'm sure. So if there are no questions from the board members last time, I'm going to ask. We will. Okay. Thank you very much. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. Board Member Mark Higgins, I move that we adjourn.
We have a second.
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. This is Board Member Stasko. I second the motion.
All right. Is there any opposition? I definitely see that there is no opposition. So with that, everyone, have a good month. Stay safe, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.